Hi, welcome to Wise Guys. This video is just a sort of an introduction to trigonometric functions. Alright, so when we're working with a right angle triangle, we use trig functions to solve for the parts of that right angle triangle. And the trig functions that we normally use to solve the right angle triangle are the cosine of the angle, and in this case A is the angle. So if we're looking at this triangle here, and that's designating this point as A, it's talking about the angle here. All right, so that's angle A. So the cosine of A is a ratio of two sides, and it's the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. Now the side that's adjacent to A is, when I'm explaining it to a student, I say, imagine that you're standing in a room that looks like this triangle. And you're the angle here, standing in the room, and someone's looking down. So this wall in that room is the side that's adjacent to the angle, or adjacent to you if you're standing in this room. And the side that's across the room from you is the side that's opposite. The long side of the right angle triangle is always the hypotenuse. And the two short sides are the sides that are connected to the right angle, or the 90 degrees. So, excuse me, the cosine of the angle is the adjacent side, which is this side, over the hypotenuse, which is here. The sine of the angle is the opposite side over the hypotenuse. So then the sine is, for this A, is the opposite side over the hypotenuse. And the tan of the angle is the opposite side over the adjacent side. And a very nice acronym for remembering this is SOHCAHTOA. So SOHCAHTOA. And when you're first working with this stuff, it helps to just write this down, or I always write these down, not necessarily all these words, but just to remind myself what I'm doing, because that way you don't have to carry so much information in your head, right? So this is sine opposite hypotenuse, which is what we have here, sine opposite hypotenuse, cosine adjacent hypotenuse, cosine adjacent hypotenuse, tan opposite adjacent, tan opposite adjacent. Okay? So now if we look at this triangle here, and we're paying attention to angle B, which is here, so that's essentially this angle right here. We can see that this long side here is our hypotenuse. The side that's adjacent to this angle right here is this side. And the side that's opposite is essentially across from this angle. So sort of across the room. Okay. So now sometimes you'll see when you're dealing with the x and y axis, you'll see you'll have to work with right angle triangles. Now in this case we have 2 points along this line, and the whole point of this piece is to talk about the fact that trig functions are simply ratios of two sides of a right triangle. And this angle here happens to be 26.57 degrees. And the tan of 26.57 degrees equals 1/2. Right? So that's the ratio of the opposite side, reminding ourselves that the tan of the angle is the opposite side over the adjacent. So 1 over 2 is the ratio of the opposite side over the adjacent side. So the opposite side is half of the adjacent side. So when we look at this, here's a right angle triangle right here. And we're dealing with the x and y axis. The 4 is talking about the x distance. The 2 is talking about the y distance. So then here we have the angle, that's the opposite side over the adjacent side. So then that would be 2 over 4. And when we look at the larger triangle here, okay, so this piece, this length, since we have 6 and 3 here, 6 is our x and 3 is our y. So this distance here is our 6 and this is our 3. So opposite over adjacent, 3 over 6. So we end up with 3 over 6. And we were talking about opposite over adjacent, which is the tan. And you can see that here we have the 2 over the 4, which equals the 3 over the 6, which is 1 over 2. And all this is information about what actually is a sine, a cosine, and a tangent. They are ratios of two sides of a right angle triangle. Now, just a sort of a sum up here. Here again, we're talking about the x and y axis, and we have a right angle triangle here. There's our angle, y is our opposite, x is our adjacent side, and our r is our hypotenuse. So the sine of the angle is the y over the hypotenuse. The cos of the angle is the x over the hypotenuse. And the tan of the angle is opposite over adjacent. And just a sort of a very quick discussion about the inverse trig functions. The cosecant of the angle is the inverse of the sine. And it's basically 1 over the sine of the angle. So that means that these numbers are simply flipped. So the cosecant of the angle is r over y, and the sine of the angle is the y over the r. The cos of the angle for this image is our adjacent, which is our x, over our hypotenuse, the r. So there's our cos. The secant is the inverse of the cos. So then this simply becomes r over x. The tan of the angle is opposite over adjacent, y over the x, and the cotangent is the inverse of that. Okay, so that's just a fairly brief introduction to trig functions. I hope you have a good day. That was brought to you by Wise Guys.